Picture this. You're in the middle of the most important presentation of your career, when suddenly your laptop crashes. The room falls silent. 50 pairs of eyes are staring at you. Your heart starts pounding. Your palms get sweaty. And in that moment, you have two choices: panic or think your way through it. What separates people who thrive under pressure from those who crumble isn't luck, intelligence, or even experience. It's the ability to engage their critical thinking skills precisely when their emotions are screaming at them to do the opposite. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how to develop this superpower. We live in a world where difficult situations are inevitable. Whether it's a financial crisis, a relationship conflict, a work emergency, or a global pandemic, life will test your ability to think clearly when everything around you is chaos. But here's what most people don't realize. Your brain actually has built-in mechanisms designed to help you navigate these challenges. The problem is, we've never been taught how to activate them. Over the next 30 minutes, I'm going to break down the exact framework that emergency responders, military strategists, and top executives use to make life-changing decisions under extreme pressure. This isn't theory. These are battle-tested techniques that work in the real world when everything is on the line. Chapter 1. The Neuroscience of Panic. When you're faced with a difficult situation, your brain doesn't just randomly start malfunctioning. There's actually a very specific biological process happening that's designed to keep you alive, but it's also designed for a world that no longer exists. Let me explain what's actually happening in your head when crisis strikes. Deep in your brain, there's a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. Think of it as your brain's smoke detector. The moment it senses danger, real or perceived, it triggers what scientists call the fight-flight-freeze response. This happens in milliseconds before your conscious mind even realizes what's going on. Here's where it gets interesting. Your amygdala can't tell the difference between a saber-toothed tiger and an angry email from your boss. Both trigger the exact same response. Your heart rate spikes, stress hormones flood your system, and blood flow is redirected away from your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for critical thinking, planning, and rational decision-making. This is why smart people make stupid decisions under pressure. It's not a character flaw. It's biology. Your brain is literally hijacked by ancient survival mechanisms that served our ancestors well when they were running from predators, but work against us in modern, complex situations. But here's the crucial part. Once you understand this process, you can interrupt it. Research from Harvard Medical School shows that people who are aware of their stress response can activate their parasympathetic nervous system, essentially hitting the brakes on panic within 60 seconds of recognizing the symptoms. The key is learning to recognize the early warning signs before your amygdala completely takes over. These signs are different for everyone, but common ones include shallow breathing, tunnel vision, racing thoughts, muscle tension in your shoulders or jaw, or suddenly feeling like you need to take immediate action without thinking it through. Elite performers in high-stress fields have developed what psychologists call meta-cognitive awareness, the ability to observe their own thinking in real time. Navy SEALs train extensively in this skill because, in combat situations, the difference between thinking clearly and panicking isn't just about mission success. It's about life and death. The beautiful thing about understanding your brain's stress response is that knowledge itself becomes power. When you feel your heart starting to race in a difficult situation, instead of thinking, "Oh no, I'm panicking," you can think, my amygdala is doing its job. Time to engage my prefrontal cortex." This simple reframe changes everything. Studies conducted at Stanford University found that people who were taught about their stress response before taking difficult exams actually performed better than those who weren't given this information. Just knowing what was happening in their brains allowed them to work with their biology instead of against it. The next time you find yourself in a high-pressure situation, try this. Take a moment to mentally step back and observe what's happening in your body and mind. Are your shoulders tense? Is your breathing shallow? Are you having the urge to make a quick decision just to escape the discomfort? Recognizing these patterns is the first step to overriding them. Chapter 2. The Stop Technique. Now that you understand what's happening in your brain during stressful situations, let's talk about the first tool in your critical thinking toolkit, the Stop Technique. This isn't some fluffy self-help concept. It's a proven method used by emergency responders, trauma surgeons, and crisis negotiators when lives are on the line. STOP stands for Stop what you're doing. Take a breath. Observe the situation and proceed with intention. It sounds simple, but the power is in the execution and the science behind why it works. The stop component is about interrupting the automatic stress response we just discussed. When your amygdala is firing and your body is preparing for fight or flight, your natural tendency is to do something, anything, to escape the discomfort. This is exactly when people make their worst decisions. They act on impulse rather than intention. Firefighters are trained never to rush into a burning building without first stopping at the threshold. They call it reading the fire. In that brief pause, they're gathering critical information that could save their lives. Which way is the smoke moving? What sounds are they hearing? Where are the potential exit routes? This same principle applies to every difficult situation in your life. The take a breath component isn't just about relaxation. It's about activating your parasympathetic nervous system. Research from the American Heart Association shows that controlled breathing, specifically a technique called box breathing, can reduce cortisol levels by up to 23% within just 2 minutes. Box breathing involves inhaling for 4 counts, holding for 4, exhaling for 4, and holding empty for 4. Navy SEALs use this exact technique before dangerous missions. But here's what most people don't know. The exhale is where the magic happens. When you extend your exhale longer than your inhale, you're sending a signal to your vagus nerve that you're safe. This activates what scientists call the rest and digest response, essentially telling your brain to bring the prefrontal cortex back online. The observe component is where critical thinking actually begins. This is about shifting from internal chaos to external awareness. Instead of being consumed by your emotional reaction, you're gathering data about what's actually happening around you. What are the facts versus your assumptions? What options do you actually have? What resources are available to you? Professional poker players are masters of this skill. In high-stakes games where hundreds of thousands of dollars are on the line, they've trained themselves to observe not just the cards and betting patterns, but their own emotional states. They know that the moment they let fear or greed drive their decisions, they're finished. The best players can maintain this observational awareness even when facing potential financial ruin. The proceed with intention component is about making conscious choices rather than reactive decisions. This is where you engage what psychologists call System 2 thinking, the slow, deliberate, logical part of your mind that can weigh options, consider consequences, and create strategic plans. Here's a real-world example of how this works. A few years ago, a pilot named Chesley Sullenberger found himself in an impossible situation when his plane hit a flock of geese, destroying both engines at 800 feet above New York City. He had less than 3 minutes to make a decision that would determine whether 155 people lived or died. In that moment, Captain Sullenberger didn't panic. He used a version of the stop technique. He stopped his initial impulse to try returning to the airport, a decision that would have been catastrophic. He took controlled breaths to maintain his composure. He observed all available options: nearby airports, open fields, and the Hudson River. Then he proceeded with intention, executing the only water landing in commercial aviation history where everyone survived. The key to mastering the stop technique is practice. You can't wait until you're in a crisis to try this for the first time. Start using it in low-stakes situations. When you're stuck in traffic, when you receive a frustrating text message, or when you're facing a difficult decision at work. The more you practice interrupting your automatic reactions in small moments, the more accessible this tool becomes when you really need it. Remember, the goal isn't to eliminate stress or difficult emotions. That's neither possible nor healthy. The goal is to create space between what happens to you and how you respond. In that space lies your power to think critically and act wisely, even when everything around you is falling apart. Chapter 3. Information versus noise. In difficult situations, one of the biggest challenges to clear thinking isn't the lack of information, it's the overwhelming amount of information, much of which is irrelevant, contradictory, or deliberately misleading. Learning to distinguish between valuable information and destructive noise is perhaps the most crucial critical thinking skill you can develop. Let's start with understanding what information actually is versus what we think it is. Real information has 3 key characteristics. It's verifiable, it's relevant to your specific situation, and it helps you make better decisions. Everything else is noise. The problem is, our brains are wired to treat all incoming data as equally important, especially when we're stressed. Think about the last time you faced a major life decision, maybe choosing a career path, ending a relationship, or making a significant financial investment. If you're like most people, you probably found yourself drowning in opinions from friends, family, experts, and the internet. You consumed articles, watched videos, read forums, and sought advice from anyone who would give it. But did all that information actually make your decision easier? Probably not. This phenomenon has a name: analysis paralysis. Psychologist Barry Schwartz's research at Swarthmore College found that when people are presented with too many options or too much information, they often make worse decisions or avoid making decisions altogether. This is particularly dangerous in crisis situations where delayed action can be more costly than imperfect action. So how do professional decision-makers cut through the noise? They use what intelligence analysts call the need-to-know principle. Before seeking any new information, they ask themselves 3 questions. What specific decision am I trying to make? What information would change my course of action? What's the minimum amount of data I need to move forward responsibly? Let me give you a practical example. Imagine you're facing a potential layoff at work. Your stress response kicks in, and suddenly you're consuming every article about the job market, reading horror stories on LinkedIn, checking your company's stock price obsessively, and asking everyone you know about their career experiences. Most of this activity feels productive, but it's actually noise. Here's what actionable information gathering would look like instead. First, you'd clarify your specific situation. What's actually being communicated about potential layoffs versus what you're assuming. Then you'd focus only on information that helps you prepare, updating your resume, identifying your transferable skills, researching specific companies you'd want to work for, and strengthening relationships with people in your professional network. The difference is intentionality. Noise gathering is driven by anxiety and the illusion that more information will reduce uncertainty. Information gathering is driven by specific goals and the understanding that the right information at the right time enables better action. Another crucial skill is evaluating source credibility, especially in our current information environment, where anyone can publish anything. Intelligence professionals use a system called the Source Reliability Matrix. They evaluate sources based on two criteria. Reliability. Has this source been accurate in the past? And access. Does this source actually have first-hand knowledge of what they're claiming? Apply this to your own life. When you're facing a difficult situation and people are offering advice, ask yourself, has this person successfully navigated similar challenges? Do they have direct experience with what you're going through? Are they speaking from wisdom or just opinion? This doesn't mean you should ignore all advice from people who haven't been in your exact situation, but you should weight it appropriately. Social media deserves special attention here because it's designed to amplify emotional content over accurate content. The algorithms that determine what you see prioritize engagement, not truth. Posts that make you angry, scared, or outraged get more clicks, shares, and comments than posts that inform you calmly. This means that during difficult times, when you're most vulnerable and most likely to seek information and support online, you're also most likely to encounter the most distorted version of reality. Here's a practical framework for information filtering that works in any situation. First, distinguish between what you can control and what you can't. Focus your information gathering only on areas where you have agency. Second, set specific time limits for research. Give yourself permission to make decisions based on good enough information rather than perfect information. Third, actively seek out contradictory viewpoints to test your assumptions, but only from credible sources. The goal isn't to become cynical or to dismiss all external input. The goal is to become a conscious consumer of information rather than a passive recipient of noise. When you're in a difficult situation, your information diet is just as important as your food diet. Choose sources that nourish your ability to think clearly and act effectively, not sources that feed your anxiety and confusion. Remember, in most difficult situations, you already know more than you think you do. The challenge isn't gathering more information. It's trusting yourself to act on the information you already have, while remaining open to truly relevant new data that emerges along the way. Chapter 4. The Decision-Making Framework. When you're under pressure and facing multiple options, your brain often defaults to one of two extremes: paralysis by analysis or impulsive decision-making. Neither serves you well. What you need is a systematic approach to decision-making that works regardless of the situation's complexity or your emotional state. Professional decision-makers, from emergency room doctors to military commanders to Fortune 500 CEOs, all use variations of the same basic framework. It's not complicated, but it is comprehensive. Let me walk you through the 5-step process that can transform how you navigate difficult choices. Step 1 is problem definition. And this is where most people go wrong. They start trying to solve problems before they've clearly defined what the problem actually is. This sounds obvious, but it's remarkably difficult to do well when you're stressed. Your brain wants to jump to solutions because solutions feel like progress. But solving the wrong problem perfectly is worse than solving the right problem imperfectly. Here's how to define problems like a pro. Start by writing down what you think the problem is in one sentence. Then ask yourself, what problem is this problem a symptom of? Often, what seems like the main issue is actually just the most visible manifestation of a deeper challenge. Keep asking this question until you reach what feels like the root cause. For example, you might think your problem is, "I hate my job," but after deeper analysis, you realize the real problem is, "I need more autonomy and creative challenge in my work." The first problem leads to solutions like quit and find a new job. The second problem opens up solutions like negotiate for different responsibilities, start a side project, or find ways to make your current role more engaging. Step 2 is gathering relevant information. But we're going to approach this differently than most people do. Instead of trying to learn everything about your situation, you're going to focus on 3 specific types of information: constraints, resources, and precedents. Constraints are the non-negotiables. Things like budget limitations, time deadlines, legal requirements, or relationship boundaries. Identifying these early prevents you from wasting time on options that aren't actually available to you. Resources include not just money and time, but skills, relationships, knowledge, and opportunities that you can leverage. Most people underestimate their available resources because they focus on what they lack rather than what they have. Precedents are examples of how similar situations have been handled successfully or unsuccessfully in the past. This could be your own past experiences, case studies from your industry, historical examples, or stories from people you trust. The goal isn't to copy what others have done, but to learn from patterns and avoid repeating obvious mistakes. Step 3 is generating options, and this is where creativity meets practicality. The key principle here is quantity before quality. Research from creativity expert Dr. Slouplas Teresa Amabile shows that your first ideas are usually your most obvious ideas, not your best ideas. You need to push through the obvious to reach the innovative. Use the rule of 10. Force yourself to come up with at least 10 possible approaches to your situation before evaluating any of them. This prevents you from getting attached to your first idea and helps you discover options you might not have considered otherwise. Include some seemingly ridiculous options in your list. Often, these contain seeds of genuinely innovative solutions. Here's a technique used by design thinking professionals. For each option you generate, ask, what would need to be true for this to work? This question helps you identify the assumptions behind each potential solution and reveals which obstacles are real versus which are imaginary. Step 4 is evaluation, where you systematically compare your options against your criteria. But here's the critical insight. Your criteria should be established before you start evaluating. Otherwise, you'll unconsciously adjust your criteria to justify the option you're already emotionally attached to. Create a simple scoring system. List your top 3 to 5 criteria for a good solution. Things like minimizes financial risk, aligns with my long-term goals, is achievable within 6 months, or preserves important relationships. Then rate each option on a scale of 1 to 5 for each criterion. The numbers don't make the decision for you, but they help you think systematically about trade-offs. Pay special attention to options that score well on your most important criteria and poorly on your least important ones. These are often better choices than options that score moderately well across all criteria. Also look for options that perform significantly better or worse than you expected. These deserve deeper investigation. Step 5 is implementation planning, which is where good decisions become good outcomes. This step involves 3 components: defining success metrics, identifying potential obstacles, and creating contingency plans. Success metrics answer the question, how will I know if this decision is working? Be specific and include both quantitative measures, numbers, deadlines, amounts, and qualitative measures, feelings, relationships, satisfaction levels. Set check-in dates where you'll evaluate progress and make adjustments if necessary. Obstacle identification involves asking, what could go wrong, and how will I handle it if it does? This isn't pessimism, it's preparation. Research from psychologist Gabriele Oettingen shows that people who mentally rehearse potential obstacles are significantly more likely to achieve their goals than those who only visualize success. Contingency planning means having backup options ready to deploy. If your primary plan isn't working after a predetermined time period or set of circumstances, what's your plan B? Having this decided in advance prevents you from staying committed to failing strategies longer than you should. The beauty of this framework is that it works for decisions ranging from, what should I have for lunch? To, should I move across the country for a new job? The complexity of your analysis should match the significance and reversibility of the decision, but the basic process remains the same. Remember, the goal isn't to make perfect decisions. It's to make good decisions quickly and adjust course as you learn new information. Perfect is the enemy of good, especially in difficult situations where the cost of delayed action often exceeds the cost of imperfect action. Chapter 5. Emotional intelligence under pressure. Here's something most people don't understand about critical thinking. It's not the opposite of emotions. It's the skillful navigation of emotions. When you're in a difficult situation, your emotions aren't the enemy of clear thinking. They're actually a source of valuable information. The problem is, most of us were never taught how to read and work with our emotions effectively. Let's start by debunking a dangerous myth: the idea that rationality means suppressing emotions. This approach doesn't just fail, it actively makes your thinking worse. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio studied people who had brain injuries that damaged their emotional processing centers while leaving their logical reasoning intact. These individuals couldn't make good decisions about anything, not even simple choices like what to eat for lunch. Here's why. Emotions are your brain's rapid processing system for complex social and environmental information. Fear alerts you to potential threats. Anger signals that your boundaries or values are being violated. Excitement indicates alignment with your goals and desires. Sadness often reflects loss or the need for connection and support. These emotional signals contain data that your conscious mind might miss or take too long to process. The key is learning to work with your emotions rather than being controlled by them. This requires developing what psychologists call emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between subtle differences in your emotional states and understand what each emotion is telling you about your situation. Most people operate with what researchers call low emotional granularity. They experience emotions in broad categories: good, bad, stressed, or fine. But people with high emotional granularity can distinguish between feeling frustrated versus disappointed, excited versus hopeful, or concerned versus terrified. This precision matters because different emotions require different responses. Let me give you a practical example. Imagine you're in a tense negotiation. Maybe you're buying a car, asking for a raise, or working through a conflict with your partner. You notice you're feeling upset. That's not enough information to guide your next move. Are you feeling disrespected because the other person is dismissing your concerns? Are you feeling insecure because you're not sure if your position is reasonable? Are you feeling frustrated because the conversation isn't making progress? Each of these emotions suggests a different strategy. Here's how to develop this skill. Throughout your day, especially during challenging moments, pause and ask yourself, what exactly am I feeling right now? Don't just name one emotion. Most situations involve multiple emotions simultaneously. You might feel excited about a new opportunity and anxious about the risks it involves. Both emotions are providing useful information about different aspects of the situation. The next step is understanding what each emotion is telling you about your needs, values, or the situation itself. Anxiety often signals that you need more information, preparation, or support. Anger frequently indicates that something important to you is being threatened or violated. Sadness might suggest that you need to process a loss or seek connection with others. But here's where it gets sophisticated. Learning to distinguish between emotions that are about the current situation versus emotions that are about past experiences being triggered by current circumstances. This is crucial for accurate decision-making. Let's say you're considering whether to trust a new business partner. You feel uneasy about them, but you're not sure why. That uneasiness could be your intuition picking up on subtle cues that your conscious mind hasn't processed. Maybe inconsistencies in their story, body language that doesn't match their words, or a gut sense that their values don't align with yours. In this case, your emotion is giving you valuable data about the present situation, but that same uneasiness could also be triggered by past experiences with people who betrayed your trust. Your brain might be pattern matching this new person to someone who hurt you previously, even though the objective circumstances are completely different. In this case, your emotion is giving you information about your past, not about the current situation. Learning to make this distinction requires what therapists call mindful awareness, the ability to observe your thoughts and feelings without immediately acting on them. When you notice a strong emotional reaction, try asking yourself, is this feeling about what's happening right now? Or is this feeling familiar from other times in my life? Professional negotiators, therapists, and crisis counselors are trained in a technique called emotional regulation, which isn't about suppressing feelings but about choosing how to respond to them. The process has 4 steps. Notice, name, investigate, and choose. Notice means developing awareness of your emotional state as it's happening, not just after the fact. This takes practice because emotions often manifest physically before we recognize them mentally. Learn to recognize your personal emotional signals. Maybe tension in your shoulders indicates frustration, or a knot in your stomach suggests anxiety. Name involves putting precise language to what you're experiencing. Research shows that the simple act of labeling emotions reduces their intensity and activates the prefrontal cortex, improving your ability to think clearly. But use specific language. Instead of, "I'm stressed," try, "I'm feeling overwhelmed by too many competing priorities." Investigate means exploring what the emotion is telling you about the situation and what you need. Ask yourself, what is this emotion trying to protect or achieve? What would help me feel more resourced right now? What action, if any, would be most helpful? Choose refers to consciously deciding how to respond based on all available information, including but not limited to your emotional data. You might choose to act on your emotion, to communicate about it, to take care of the underlying need it's highlighting, or to acknowledge it while proceeding with a different course of action. The goal isn't to become emotionless, it's to become emotionally intelligent. In difficult situations, this skill can mean the difference between reactions that make things worse and responses that move you toward resolution. Your emotions, when properly understood and integrated, become one of your most powerful tools for navigating complexity and uncertainty. Chapter 6: Time Pressure and Quick Decisions. One of the most challenging aspects of difficult situations is that they rarely give you the luxury of unlimited time to think things through. Whether you're dealing with a medical emergency, a financial crisis, or a relationship conflict that's escalating, you often need to make important decisions quickly. This is where most people's critical thinking skills completely fall apart. The conventional wisdom tells us that quick decisions are automatically bad decisions. But that's not true. Some of the best decisions in history were made under extreme time pressure. The key is understanding how to make fast decisions well, rather than avoiding them altogether. Let's start with understanding what actually happens to your decision-making ability under time pressure. Research from Stanford's Graduate School of Business shows that when people feel rushed, they tend to rely more heavily on mental shortcuts called heuristics. These aren't inherently bad. In fact, they're often remarkably accurate. The problem is that most people don't know which heuristics to trust and which ones lead them astray. Here's a perfect example. Experienced firefighters can look at a burning building and immediately know where the fire started, which walls are likely to collapse first, and the safest entry route. They're not running complex calculations in their heads, they're pattern matching based on thousands of hours of experience. Malcolm Gladwell wrote about this phenomenon in Blink. But what he didn't emphasize enough is that this intuitive decision-making only works in domains where you have genuine expertise. The dangerous trap is applying this fast-thinking approach to situations where you don't have sufficient experience or where the stakes are too high for trial and error learning. If you're facing a financial decision that could affect your retirement, you probably shouldn't trust your gut the same way a firefighter trusts theirs about building safety. So, how do you make good decisions quickly? The answer is preparation. Navy SEALs have a saying, "You don't rise to the occasion, you sink to your level of training." This applies perfectly to decision-making under pressure. The decisions you make in crisis situations will only be as good as the thinking frameworks you've already internalized. Here's a rapid decision-making protocol that works across different types of situations. First, immediately classify the decision by asking, is this reversible or irreversible? Reversible decisions, ones you can easily change later, should be made quickly, with about 70% of the information you think you need. Irreversible decisions, ones that significantly alter your life trajectory, deserve more careful consideration, even under time pressure. Amazon's Jeff Bezos popularized this framework, calling them Type 1 and Type 2 decisions. Type 2 decisions are like walking through a door that you can easily walk back through. Type 1 decisions are like walking through a one-way door. Most people treat all decisions like Type 1 decisions, which leads to analysis paralysis. But the majority of decisions you face are actually Type 2 decisions that you're overthinking. For reversible decisions under time pressure, use what I call the good enough principle. Ask yourself, what's the worst realistic outcome if this decision doesn't work perfectly? If you can live with that outcome, make the decision and move forward. You can always adjust course later based on new information. For irreversible decisions, even under time pressure, use a compressed version of the decision-making framework from Chapter 4. Spend 60% of your available time clearly defining the problem and gathering critical information. Spend 30% generating and evaluating options. Spend only 10% making the final choice. Most people do the opposite. They spend most of their time agonizing over the final choice, and not enough time understanding the problem or considering alternatives. Here's another crucial insight about time pressure. It often reveals your true priorities and values more clearly than unlimited time does. When you're forced to choose quickly, you can't engage in endless rationalization or try to optimize for every possible consideration. You have to identify what matters most and act on it. Emergency room doctors have mastered this skill out of necessity. They use something called triage thinking, rapidly categorizing situations based on urgency and importance. Life-threatening conditions get immediate attention. Serious but stable conditions get scheduled treatment. Minor issues wait. This same framework applies to business decisions, personal conflicts, and life choices. Try this exercise. The next time you're facing a time-pressured decision, write down your top 3 priorities for the outcome. Not 5 or 7, 3. Then evaluate your options based only on those 3 priorities. This forces you to clarify what really matters and eliminates the paralysis that comes from trying to optimize for everything simultaneously. There's also a psychological component to time pressure that most people don't consider: the fear of missing out on the perfect solution. This fear keeps you searching for options long past the point where additional search is productive. Behavioral economists call this the exploration versus exploitation problem. At some point, you need to stop exploring new possibilities and exploit the best option you've found so far. A practical rule for this: If you've been considering a decision for more than twice as long as the decision will impact your life, you're probably overthinking it. A decision about what to have for lunch shouldn't take more than a few minutes. A decision about whether to take a new job might deserve a few weeks of consideration. But a decision about which route to take to work shouldn't consume hours of your mental energy. One final point about quick decisions. They're often better when you've learned to trust your pattern recognition in specific domains. If you've been in your industry for 10 years, your instincts about business opportunities are probably more reliable than extensive analysis. If you've been in relationships for decades, your gut feelings about people's character are worth paying attention to. But if you're making decisions in unfamiliar territory, slow down and seek input from people who have relevant experience. The goal isn't to become impulsive. It's to become decisively responsive. There's a crucial difference between reacting without thinking and thinking quickly under pressure. Master this distinction, and you'll find that time pressure becomes a tool for clarity rather than a source of panic. Chapter 7. Cognitive biases that sabotage clear thinking. Your brain is an incredible pattern-matching machine, but it comes with built-in glitches that can lead you astray precisely when you need clear thinking most. These glitches, called cognitive biases, aren't random errors. They're systematic ways that your brain takes shortcuts that served our ancestors well, but can sabotage modern decision-making. Understanding these biases isn't about becoming paranoid or second-guessing every thought. It's about recognizing when your brain's automatic processing might be leading you toward poor decisions, especially in difficult situations where the stakes are high and emotions are running strong. Let's start with confirmation bias, which is probably the most dangerous bias for critical thinking. This is your brain's tendency to seek out information that confirms what you already believe, while ignoring or dismissing information that contradicts your existing views. In difficult situations, this bias can keep you trapped in ineffective approaches long after it's clear they're not working. Here's how confirmation bias typically plays out. You're facing a challenging situation, and you develop a theory about what's causing it, or how to solve it. From that point forward, you unconsciously filter information to support your theory. You notice evidence that confirms your view, and overlook evidence that contradicts it. You ask questions that are likely to give you the answers you want to hear. You seek advice from people who are likely to agree with you. The insidious thing about confirmation bias is that it makes you feel more confident in your judgments, even when those judgments are wrong. Each piece of confirming evidence feels like validation, even if you've unconsciously ignored 10 pieces of contradicting evidence. This false confidence can lead you to commit more time, energy, and resources to failing strategies. Professional investigators, whether they're detectives, journalists, or auditors, are trained to actively fight confirmation bias by seeking disconfirming evidence. They ask themselves, what would I expect to find if my current theory is wrong? Then they actively look for that evidence. If they can't find it, their confidence in their theory increases. If they do find it, they revise their theory. This approach feels uncomfortable because it requires holding your beliefs lightly, but it leads to much more accurate conclusions. Next is the sunk cost fallacy, which keeps people trapped in bad situations because they've already invested time, money, or energy. Your brain tricks you into thinking that because you've already paid a cost, you need to continue paying additional costs to justify the original investment. This is completely backwards. Past costs are gone regardless of what you do next. The only question that matters is whether future investments are likely to produce good outcomes. This bias is particularly dangerous in difficult situations because they often involve significant investments that aren't working out as planned. Maybe you've spent years in a career that's making you miserable, or you've put months of effort into a relationship that isn't improving, or you've invested money in a business venture that's struggling. The sunk cost fallacy whispers, "You can't give up now, after everything you've put into this." The antidote to sunk cost thinking is focusing on forward-looking questions. Based on what I know now, what's the best use of my future time and energy? If I was starting fresh today, would I begin this path? What would I advise a friend to do in this exact situation? This last question is particularly powerful because it helps you think about the situation more objectively. Availability bias is your brain's tendency to judge the likelihood of events based on how easily you can remember examples. Recent, dramatic, or personally experienced events feel more probable than they actually are, while gradual, quiet, or statistically common events feel less likely than they really are. This bias can seriously distort your risk assessment in difficult situations. If you recently heard about someone getting fired unexpectedly, you might overestimate the likelihood of losing your own job. If you just watched a documentary about startup success stories, you might underestimate the risks of entrepreneurship. If you've never personally experienced a particular type of crisis, you might be completely unprepared for it, even if it's statistically likely to happen. Combat availability bias by actively seeking out base rate information, the actual statistical frequency of events rather than just memorable examples. If you're worried about a particular risk, research how often it actually occurs in situations similar to yours. If you're excited about a particular opportunity, investigate how often similar opportunities actually pan out. As expected, the planning fallacy is your tendency to underestimate how long tasks will take and overestimate your ability to control outcomes. This bias is especially problematic when you're trying to work your way out of difficult situations because it leads to unrealistic timelines and inadequate preparation for obstacles. Most people estimate task duration by imagining the best-case scenario where everything goes smoothly. But experienced project managers know that things rarely go according to plan. They use techniques like reference class forecasting, looking at how long similar projects actually took, not how long they were supposed to take. When you're making plans to address a difficult situation, try this approach. Make your best estimate for how long each step will take. Then multiply by 1.5 to account for unexpected delays and complications. Also identify the 3 most likely things that could go wrong and have contingency plans ready. This isn't pessimism. It's realism that prevents small setbacks from derailing your entire strategy. Anchoring bias causes you to rely too heavily on the first piece of information you encounter when making decisions. In negotiations, this shows up as being overly influenced by opening offers. In problem-solving, it manifests as getting stuck on your first idea about what's causing a problem or how to solve it. The key to overcoming anchoring bias is deliberately generating multiple perspectives before settling on any single approach. When you first encounter a difficult situation, resist the urge to immediately jump to conclusions about causes or solutions. Instead, brainstorm at least 3 different ways to interpret what's happening and 3 different approaches to addressing it. This forces your brain to consider alternatives rather than getting locked onto the first explanation that comes to mind. Finally, there's optimism bias, the tendency to overestimate positive outcomes and underestimate negative ones. While optimism is generally healthy, unrealistic optimism in difficult situations can prevent you from taking necessary precautions or preparing adequately for challenges. The balance point is what researchers call realistic optimism, maintaining hope and motivation, while accurately assessing risks and preparing for difficulties. This means planning for success while also planning for obstacles. It means believing in your ability to handle challenges while also acknowledging that challenges are likely to arise. Remember, these biases aren't character flaws. They're features of human cognition that usually serve you well but can lead you astray in certain situations. The goal isn't to eliminate them entirely, which is probably impossible anyway. The goal is to recognize when you might be vulnerable to them, and to have strategies for checking your thinking when the stakes are high. The most powerful technique is to regularly ask yourself, how might I be wrong about this? And what evidence would change my mind? These questions activate your critical thinking and help you step outside your automatic mental patterns. In difficult situations, this kind of intellectual humility can be the difference between solutions that work and solutions that make things worse. Chapter 8. Building Mental Resilience. Mental resilience isn't something you're born with or without. It's a skill you can develop. And in difficult situations, your level of mental resilience often determines whether you'll think clearly under pressure or become overwhelmed by circumstances beyond your control. The good news is that resilience can be built systematically, like physical fitness. Let's start by understanding what resilience actually is, because most people misunderstand this concept. Resilience isn't about being tough, stoic, or unaffected by difficulties. It's not about never feeling stressed, scared, or overwhelmed. True resilience is about maintaining your ability to think clearly and take effective action even when you're experiencing intense emotions or facing significant challenges. Resilient people feel the same emotions as everyone else. They just don't let those emotions hijack their decision-making processes. They've developed what psychologists call cognitive flexibility, the ability to adapt their thinking and behavior as situations change. This is crucial because difficult situations are, by definition, situations where your normal approaches aren't working. The foundation of mental resilience is what therapists call distress tolerance, your capacity to experience uncomfortable emotions without immediately trying to escape them or make them go away. Most people have very low distress tolerance because we live in a culture that promises quick fixes for every kind of discomfort. But in difficult situations, some level of discomfort is inevitable. If you can't tolerate that discomfort, you'll make decisions based on escaping the feeling rather than solving the problem. Here's how to build distress tolerance systematically. Start by practicing with small discomforts in low-stakes situations. When you're stuck in traffic, instead of immediately reaching for your phone or getting frustrated, try just sitting with the feeling of impatience. Notice what it feels like in your body without trying to change it. When you receive disappointing news, allow yourself to feel disappointed for a few minutes before jumping into problem-solving mode. The key insight is that emotions, even intense ones, are temporary. They rise, peak, and fall like waves. Most people panic when they feel the emotion rising and try to stop the wave before it crests. But if you can ride the wave without fighting it, it will naturally subside on its own. This doesn't mean becoming passive. It means staying present with your experience, while maintaining your capacity for intentional action. Another crucial component of resilience is developing what cognitive behavioral therapists call cognitive reframing skills. This is the ability to interpret challenging situations in ways that preserve your sense of agency and possibility, rather than reinforcing feelings of helplessness or victimization. Resilient people don't pretend that bad things are good or that problems aren't real. Instead, they focus on aspects of difficult situations that they can influence rather than aspects they can't control. They ask questions like, "What can I learn from this? How might this challenge help me grow? What opportunities might emerge from this disruption? And what aspects of this situation can I influence, even if I can't control the whole thing?" This isn't toxic positivity. It's strategic perspective taking. You're not denying reality. You're choosing to focus your mental energy on elements of reality that empower you to take effective action. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, wrote that while we can't always control what happens to us, we can always control how we respond to what happens to us. This choice of response is where your power lies. Building resilience also requires developing what researchers call stress inoculation. Just like vaccines expose your immune system to small amounts of pathogens to build resistance, stress inoculation involves intentionally exposing yourself to manageable challenges to build your capacity for handling larger ones. This could mean taking on projects that stretch your abilities, having difficult conversations you've been avoiding, or putting yourself in situations where you might fail or be rejected. The key is choosing challenges that are difficult enough to require growth, but not so overwhelming that they traumatize you. Think of it as going to the gym for your mental resilience muscles. Elite athletes and military personnel use a technique called visualization or mental rehearsal to build resilience. They repeatedly imagine themselves successfully navigating challenging scenarios, including scenarios where things go wrong, and they have to adapt. This mental practice creates neural pathways that make effective responses more automatic when real challenges arise. You can apply this to your own life by regularly imagining how you would handle various difficult situations that might arise. What would you do if you lost your job? How would you respond if a close relationship ended? How would you handle a health crisis or financial emergency? Don't obsess over these scenarios, but do think through them enough that you have a general sense of how you would respond. This preparation reduces anxiety and improves performance when real challenges occur. Social support is another critical component of resilience. But it's not just about having people to comfort you. Resilient people cultivate relationships with individuals who can provide different types of support. Emotional support for processing feelings, informational support for gaining perspective and advice, and instrumental support for practical help when needed. More importantly, resilient people know how to ask for help effectively. They don't wait until they're completely overwhelmed to reach out. They communicate clearly about what kind of support they need. And they maintain relationships during good times so that support is available during difficult times. But here's something many people don't realize. Giving support to others actually builds your own resilience. When you help other people navigate challenges, you develop confidence in your problem-solving abilities and expand your repertoire of coping strategies. You also create a sense of meaning and purpose that sustains you through your own difficulties. Finally, resilience requires what positive psychologists call post-traumatic growth, the ability to extract learning and strength from difficult experiences rather than just surviving them. This doesn't happen automatically. It requires intentional reflection and meaning making. After you've navigated a challenging situation, ask yourself, what did I learn about my own capabilities? What strategies worked well that I want to remember for next time? How has this experience changed my perspective in ways that might be helpful? What would I do differently if I faced a similar situation again? Keep a record of these insights. Many people go through multiple difficult situations without building cumulative wisdom because they don't systematically extract lessons from their experiences. But when you intentionally harvest the learning from challenges, each difficult situation makes you better equipped to handle the next one. Remember, building resilience is like building physical fitness. It requires consistent practice over time, not just effort when you're facing a crisis. The time to build resilience is before you need it. Start with small challenges and work your way up. Develop your distress tolerance in low-stakes situations. Practice reframing problems in terms of opportunities and growth. Build supportive relationships and help others navigate their challenges. When you invest in building mental resilience proactively, you'll find that difficult situations become more manageable and less overwhelming. You won't eliminate stress or eliminate problems, but you'll develop the capacity to think clearly and act effectively, regardless of what life throws at you. Chapter 9. Communication during crisis. When you're in a difficult situation, how you communicate can either escalate the crisis or help resolve it. Unfortunately, stress tends to bring out the worst in our communication habits. We become more reactive, less empathetic, and more likely to say things we later regret. Learning to communicate effectively under pressure is not just about preserving relationships. It's about gathering information, building alliances, and creating solutions that work for everyone involved. Let's start with the biggest communication mistake people make during crises: emotional dumping. This happens when you're so overwhelmed by your own feelings that you use other people as emotional trash cans, unloading all your stress, fear, and frustration without considering their capacity to handle it or their ability to actually help. Emotional dumping feels temporarily relieving for you, but it often makes your situation worse. It overwhelms the people you need support from. It doesn't lead to productive problem-solving, and it can damage relationships at the exact moment when you need those relationships most. The people who care about you want to help, but they need you to communicate in a way that allows them to be helpful. Here's how to communicate your struggles without emotional dumping. Start by being clear about what kind of support you're seeking. Are you looking for practical advice, emotional support, or just someone to listen? Different people are good at providing different types of support, and the same person might be available for different types of support at different times. Try using language like, "I'm dealing with a challenging situation, and I could use some perspective. Do you have 20 minutes to talk through some options with me?" Or, "I'm feeling overwhelmed right now, and could use some emotional support. Would you be up for listening while I process what's happening?" This approach respects other people's boundaries while clearly communicating your needs. Another crucial skill is learning to separate facts from interpretations when you're communicating about difficult situations. When you're stressed, your brain automatically blends objective events with your subjective reactions to those events. This makes it harder for other people to understand what's actually happening. and how they might help. Practice describing situations in two parts. First, the observable facts, then your thoughts and feelings about those facts. For example, instead of saying, "My boss is trying to sabotage my career," try, "My boss gave my project to someone else without explaining why, and I'm feeling confused and worried about what this means for my future here." This approach serves multiple purposes. It helps other people understand the situation more clearly. It forces you to distinguish between what you know for certain and what you're assuming or interpreting. And it opens up space for different perspectives on what the facts might mean and how you might respond. When you're communicating during a crisis, you also need to be strategic about timing and context. Don't try to have important conversations when emotions are at their peak. Don't attempt to solve complex problems in public settings or when people are distracted. And don't expect one conversation to resolve everything. Some situations require multiple discussions over time. Here's a framework for difficult conversations that works in both personal and professional contexts. Start by establishing mutual understanding of the situation. Make sure everyone involved agrees on the basic facts and the scope of the problem you're trying to solve. Then, identify shared goals. What outcomes would everyone involved consider successful? Finally, brainstorm solutions together rather than advocating for predetermined positions. This approach works because it shifts the dynamic from adversarial to collaborative. Instead of trying to convince other people that your perspective is right, you're working together to understand the situation and find solutions that work for everyone. Even when people have conflicting interests, there are usually some shared goals that can serve as a foundation for problem solving. Active listening becomes especially important during crises because people are more emotional and less articulate than usual. This means you need to listen not just to what people are saying, but to what they're trying to communicate underneath their words. Are they expressing fear, anger, confusion, or something else? What do they need to feel heard and understood? Practice reflecting back what you're hearing before responding with your own perspective. It sounds like you're frustrated because you feel like this situation could have been prevented. Is that right? Or, I'm hearing that you're worried about how this will affect your family. Did I understand that correctly? This approach slows down the conversation and ensures that people feel understood before you try to problem solve. One of the most powerful communication tools during difficult situations is asking questions that help people think through problems rather than just giving advice. Questions like, what options are you considering? What would need to be different for this to work? How have you handled similar situations in the past? And what would success look like to you? Help people tap into their own wisdom and problem-solving abilities. This approach is more effective than just telling people what you think they should do, because people are more likely to implement solutions they've participated in creating. It also helps you understand their perspective more deeply, which allows you to provide more relevant support. When you're communicating about problems, be careful not to minimize other people's experiences or rush them towards solutions before they've had a chance to process what's happening. Phrases like, at least, or you should just, or have you tried, often shut down communication rather than opening it up. Sometimes people need to be heard and understood before they're ready to brainstorm solutions. Finally, remember that communication during crises isn't just about talking. It's also about creating safety for honest conversation. This means managing your own emotional reactions so that other people don't feel like they need to take care of your feelings while they're dealing with their own challenges. It means being trustworthy with sensitive information. And it means following through on commitments you make during difficult conversations. Pay attention to your nonverbal communication as well. Your tone of voice, body language, and facial expressions often communicate more than your words, especially when emotions are running high. If you're saying supportive words, but your body language communicates impatience or judgment, people will respond to the nonverbal message. The goal of crisis communication isn't to eliminate conflict or make everyone feel better immediately. The goal is to create understanding, preserve important relationships, and work collaboratively towards solutions. Sometimes this means having uncomfortable conversations, setting difficult boundaries, or acknowledging painful truths. But when done skillfully, these conversations can actually strengthen relationships and lead to better outcomes than avoiding the difficult topics altogether. Chapter 10. Learning from difficult situations. Here's a truth that most people don't want to hear. Difficult situations are inevitable, but suffering through them repeatedly without gaining wisdom is optional. Every challenge you face contains valuable information about yourself, your relationships, your goals, and your strategies. But most people are so focused on getting through difficult times that they miss the learning opportunities embedded within them. This isn't about finding silver linings or pretending that bad things are good. It's about developing the skill of extracting maximum learning from minimum suffering. When you become skilled at this, you start to see patterns in your challenges, develop more effective strategies for handling them, and build confidence in your ability to navigate whatever life brings your way. The first step is shifting from a victim mindset to a learner mindset. A victim mindset asks, "Why is this happening to me?" A learner mindset asks, "What is this situation trying to teach me?" Both are natural responses to difficulty, but they lead to very different outcomes. The victim mindset keeps you stuck in emotional reactions and reduces your sense of agency. The learner mindset helps you maintain a sense of purpose and direction even in challenging circumstances. This doesn't mean blaming yourself for everything that goes wrong or pretending you have control over things you don't. External events, other people's choices, and random circumstances all play roles in creating difficult situations. But you always have some level of choice in how you interpret and respond to what happens to you. Start by distinguishing between what happened and why it happened. The what is usually clear. You lost a job, a relationship ended, you faced a health crisis, or you encountered a financial setback. The why is where most people get stuck, especially when they focus on factors outside their control. Instead of asking, "Why did this happen to me?" ask, "What factors contributed to this situation? And which of those factors can I influence going forward?" This approach helps you identify patterns in your challenges without falling into self-blame or helplessness. Maybe you keep choosing jobs at companies that don't value your strengths. Maybe you avoid difficult conversations until small problems become big ones. Maybe you take on too many commitments and then struggle to maintain quality. These patterns are valuable information that can help you make better choices in the future. Here's a systematic approach to learning from difficult situations. First, once the immediate crisis has passed and your emotions have stabilized, conduct what business consultants call a post-mortem analysis. This involves examining what went well, what went poorly, and what you would do differently next time. But here's the key. Focus more on your decisions and actions than on external circumstances. External circumstances will always be somewhat unpredictable and often outside your control. Your decisions and actions are where you have the most influence and where learning can have the most impact on future outcomes. Ask yourself specific questions. What early warning signs did I miss? At what point could I have changed course? What assumptions did I make that turned out to be wrong? Which of my strategies were effective and which weren't? What resources did I fail to utilize that might have helped? How did my communication style contribute to the outcome? Write down your answers. There's something about the act of writing that forces you to be more precise and honest than just thinking through these questions mentally. You're also creating a record that you can refer back to in future challenging situations. Next, identify the specific skills or knowledge that would have been helpful during this situation. Maybe you realize you need to get better at having difficult conversations early before problems escalate. Maybe you discover that you need to build a stronger financial emergency fund. Maybe you recognize that you need to develop better boundaries or learn to say no more effectively. Turn these insights into specific learning goals. Don't just tell yourself, I need to be better at communication. Instead, identify concrete steps like, I will practice having one difficult conversation per month. Or, I will read 2 books about effective communication and practice one new technique each week. Vague intentions rarely lead to lasting change, but specific plans often do. One of the most valuable things you can learn from difficult situations is how to recognize them earlier. Most major problems start as minor problems that are ignored or mishandled. Relationship conflicts usually begin with small miscommunications that aren't addressed. Financial crises often start with gradual lifestyle inflation or ignoring early budget warning signs. Health problems frequently have early symptoms that are dismissed or rationalized away. Pay attention to the early stages of your difficult situations. What were the first signs that something wasn't going well? How long did you ignore or minimize those signs before taking action? What prevented you from addressing the situation earlier? This information is incredibly valuable for preventing future problems or catching them when they're still manageable. Also, examine your support systems during difficult times. Who was helpful, and in what ways? Who wasn't helpful, and why? What kinds of support did you need that you didn't know how to ask for? Are there gaps in your support network that you should address? Building strong relationships during good times is one of the best investments you can make for handling future challenges. Don't forget to acknowledge what you did well during difficult situations. Most people are so focused on what went wrong that they miss valuable information about their own strengths and effective strategies. What decisions are you proud of? What actions took courage? What strengths did you discover about yourself? How did you grow through this experience? This isn't about false positivity. It's about accurately assessing your capabilities so you can build on them in the future. Confidence comes from recognizing evidence of your own competence, especially your ability to handle challenges. When you systematically acknowledge what you've handled well, you build resilience for future difficulties. Finally, consider sharing your learning with others. Teaching what you've learned serves multiple purposes. It helps solidify the lessons in your own mind. It provides value to people who might face similar challenges, and it often leads to additional insights through other people's questions and perspectives. This could be as simple as having honest conversations with friends about what you've learned, writing about your experiences, or mentoring someone who's facing similar challenges. The act of articulating your learning to others often reveals additional insights that you might miss if you only reflect privately. Remember, the goal isn't to become someone who seeks out difficult situations or enjoys suffering. The goal is to become someone who can extract maximum value from the inevitable challenges that life presents. When you develop this skill, you start to see difficult situations not as random misfortunes but as information-rich experiences that contribute to your wisdom and effectiveness. This perspective doesn't eliminate the pain or frustration of difficult times, but it does give them meaning. And when challenging experiences have meaning, they become more bearable and less likely to defeat you. You start to trust your ability to handle whatever comes your way, because you know that even if you can't control what happens to you, you can always learn from it and use that learning to create a better future. Chapter 11. The Power of Systems Thinking. Most people approach difficult situations by focusing on immediate symptoms rather than underlying systems. They try to fix the most obvious problem without understanding the interconnected factors that created the situation in the first place. This is like treating a fever without addressing the infection causing it. You might get temporary relief, but the core issue remains unresolved. Systems thinking is the ability to see patterns, relationships, and root causes, rather than just isolated events. It's what separates people who solve problems permanently from those who find themselves dealing with the same issues over and over again. When you develop this skill, you start to see that most difficult situations aren't random occurrences. They're the predictable result of systems that are working exactly as they're designed to work. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine you're consistently overwhelmed at work, regularly missing deadlines, and feeling like you're always playing catch-up. The obvious solution might seem like working longer hours or getting better at time management. But systems thinking would lead you to ask different questions. What processes are creating this workload? How are priorities being set and communicated? What happens when you try to push back on unrealistic expectations? How does the reward system at your company actually work? When you examine the situation from this broader perspective, you might discover that the real problem isn't your personal productivity. It's that your company has a culture of saying yes to everything without considering capacity, or that there's no clear process for prioritizing competing demands, or that people are rewarded for taking on more work, regardless of quality or sustainability. Understanding these systemic factors completely changes your approach to solving the problem. Instead of just working harder, you might need to have conversations about workload management, propose better prioritization processes, or even consider whether this organization's systems are compatible with your long-term well-being. Systems thinking starts with recognizing that everything is connected to everything else. The challenge you're facing didn't appear in a vacuum. It emerged from a web of relationships, processes, incentives, and feedback loops. Sometimes, the most important factors are several steps removed from the immediate problem. Here's how to develop systems thinking. Start by mapping out all the factors that might be contributing to your difficult situation. Don't just list the obvious ones. Push yourself to identify less visible influences. What organizational structures, cultural norms, Economic pressures or historical patterns might be playing a role. Who benefits from the current situation staying the same? What happens when people try to change things? Pay special attention to feedback loops, situations where the consequences of actions either reinforce or counteract the original action. For example, when you're stressed about money, you might work longer hours to earn more, which leaves you less time for planning and self-care, which can lead to poor financial decisions, which creates more money stress. Understanding these loops helps you find places to intervene more effectively. Look for what systems theorists call leverage points, places where a small change can produce significant improvements across the entire system. These are often found in policies, rules, incentives, or information flows rather than in individual behaviors. Changing how decisions get made or how information is shared can be more powerful than trying to change what specific decisions are made. Consider the difference between treating symptoms and addressing root causes. Symptoms are the visible problems that get your attention. Root causes are the underlying factors that generate those symptoms. Most people spend their energy on symptoms because they're more obvious and often easier to address in the short term. But unless you address root causes, symptoms will keep reappearing. Here's a practical framework for identifying root causes. When you encounter a problem, ask, "What caused this?" Then take that answer and ask, "What caused that?" Keep asking this question until you reach something fundamental, usually a decision, policy, incentive structure, or belief system that's driving the whole chain of events. This technique, called root cause analysis, is used in everything from manufacturing to medicine to prevent problems from recurring. Systems thinking also requires understanding unintended consequences. Every action you take in a complex system will have effects beyond what you intended, and some of those effects might actually make your original problem worse. This isn't a reason to avoid taking action. It's a reason to think more carefully about what actions you take and to monitor the results so you can adjust course when necessary. For example, if you're dealing with conflict in a relationship, your first instinct might be to avoid difficult conversations to keep the peace. But this approach often creates unintended consequences. Problems don't get resolved. Resentment builds up, and trust erodes. The very behavior intended to preserve the relationship can end up damaging it. One of the most powerful applications of systems thinking is recognizing patterns across different areas of your life. The same systemic issues that show up in your work relationships might also appear in your personal relationships, your financial decisions, or your health habits. When you can see these patterns, you can address them at a deeper level, rather than treating each manifestation separately. Maybe you have a pattern of avoiding difficult conversations until they become crises. This might show up as not addressing performance issues with employees, not discussing relationship problems with your partner, and not dealing with financial problems until they become emergencies. Recognizing this pattern allows you to work on the underlying skill, becoming comfortable with difficult conversations, rather than just reacting to each crisis individually. Systems thinking also helps you understand why some problems persist despite people's best efforts to solve them. Often, well-intentioned interventions fail because they don't account for how the system will respond to changes. People might resist new approaches not because they're stubborn, but because the existing system rewards old behaviors and punishes new ones. This is why sustainable change often requires changing multiple elements of a system simultaneously, not just individual behaviors, but also the policies, incentives, and structures that support those behaviors. It's also why the most effective leaders focus on creating conditions where good decisions are easy and bad decisions are difficult, rather than just expecting people to make better choices within existing systems. The goal of systems thinking isn't to make you feel overwhelmed by complexity. It's to help you find more effective and sustainable solutions to the challenges you face. When you understand the systems creating your problems, you can often find simpler and more elegant ways to address them. Sometimes this means working within existing systems more skillfully. Sometimes it means changing the systems themselves. And sometimes it means recognizing that certain systems are fundamentally incompatible with your goals and finding ways to participate in different systems entirely. Remember, you are part of every system you're trying to understand or change. Your actions, decisions, and even your attention contribute to maintaining or altering the systems around you. This gives you more influence than you might realize. But it also means you need to be honest about how your own patterns might be contributing to the problems you're trying to solve. Chapter 12. Managing multiple competing priorities. One of the most common sources of stress and poor decision-making is feeling pulled in multiple directions by competing priorities. You have work deadlines, family obligations, health goals, financial concerns, and personal relationships all demanding your attention simultaneously. Without a systematic approach to managing these competing demands, you end up in constant reactive mode, making decisions based on whatever feels most urgent rather than what's most important. The traditional advice is to create to-do lists and prioritize tasks. But this approach misses the deeper challenge. The problem isn't usually that you don't know what needs to be done. It's that you have more legitimate priorities than you have time and energy to address adequately. The real skill is learning to make strategic trade-offs rather than trying to do everything perfectly. Let's start with understanding the difference between urgent and important tasks. A framework popularized by former President Dwight Eisenhower. Urgent tasks demand immediate attention. They're the emails marked ASAP, the crying child, the overdue bill. Important tasks contribute to your long-term goals and values. They're things like building relationships, developing skills, taking care of your health, or working on meaningful projects. Most people spend the majority of their time on urgent tasks while neglecting important ones. This creates a cycle where the lack of attention to important tasks eventually makes them urgent. You put off regular exercise until you have a health crisis. You avoid difficult conversations until relationships reach a breaking point. You postpone financial planning until you face an emergency. Breaking this cycle requires deliberately protecting time for important but non-urgent activities. This isn't just about time management. It's about value management. You need to be clear about what you're trying to achieve in the long term and make sure your daily choices are aligned with those goals, even when urgent demands are screaming for your attention. Here's a practical approach. Every week, identify the 3 most important outcomes you want to achieve across all areas of your life. Not tasks, but outcomes. Instead of respond to emails, think maintain good communication with key clients. Instead of go to the gym, think take concrete steps toward better health. This forces you to think about results rather than just activities. Then, for each outcome, Identify the minimum viable actions that would move you meaningfully toward that goal. What's the smallest amount of effort that would still make a real difference? This prevents perfectionism from paralyzing you and helps you make progress even when you can't do everything you'd ideally like to do. The key insight is that doing something consistently is almost always better than doing everything perfectly occasionally. A 15-minute daily walk is more valuable for your health than a 2-hour workout once a week. Sending a brief check-in text to an important friend every week is better for your relationship than elaborate gestures once a month. Another crucial skill is learning to recognize and break the "everything is important" trap. When you treat all demands as equally important, you implicitly make everything equally unimportant. Real prioritization requires making difficult choices about what matters most and what matters less. Not just organizing your tasks more efficiently. This is emotionally challenging because it means accepting that you can't be everything to everyone all the time. You can't be the perfect employee, the perfect parent, the perfect friend, and the perfect self-improver simultaneously. Trying to excel in all areas at once usually results in mediocrity in most areas and burnout in yourself. Instead, consider operating in seasons or cycles where you intentionally focus more energy on certain priorities while maintaining others at a baseline level. Maybe this quarter you focus extra attention on a work project while maintaining your relationships and health habits, but putting personal hobbies on the back burner. Next quarter, you might shift focus to family time or personal development. The key is making these choices consciously rather than letting circumstances decide for you. When you're intentional about where you're putting your energy, you can communicate your priorities to others and make choices that align with your current focus. When you're reactive, you end up disappointing people and feeling guilty because you're never fully present anywhere. Learn to distinguish between different types of competing priorities. Sometimes the competition is real. You literally cannot do two things at the same time. But often the competition is artificial, created by unrealistic expectations or poor planning. Maybe you can find ways to combine priorities, delegate some responsibilities, or negotiate different timelines. For example, if you're struggling to balance work demands with family time, the solution might not be choosing one over the other. It might be having honest conversations with your boss about workload, finding ways to include family members in work-related activities, or restructuring your schedule to create better boundaries between work and personal time. One of the most powerful tools for managing competing priorities is learning to say no strategically. Every yes to one thing is an implicit no to something else. When you say yes without considering what you're saying no to, you end up overcommitted and underperforming across multiple areas. Before accepting new commitments, ask yourself, what will I need to say no to in order to do this well? If you can't identify what you'll sacrifice, you're probably taking on more than you can handle. This doesn't mean never accepting new opportunities. It means making conscious trade-offs rather than unconscious ones. Develop language for saying no gracefully. Practice phrases like, "I'm honored that you thought of me, but I'm not able to give this the attention it deserves right now." Or, "This sounds like a great opportunity, but it doesn't align with my current priorities." The goal is to decline without burning bridges or appearing disinterested in future opportunities. Also recognize that managing competing priorities is an ongoing skill, not a problem you solve once. Your circumstances, goals, and capabilities will change over time. which means your approach to prioritization needs to evolve as well. What worked when you were single might not work when you have a family. What worked early in your career might not work as you take on more responsibility. Regularly step back and evaluate whether your current approach to priorities is serving you well. Are you making progress on what matters most to you? Are you maintaining important relationships? Are you taking care of your fundamental needs for health, rest, and renewal? If not, it's time to adjust your strategy rather than just trying harder with your current approach. Remember, the goal isn't to eliminate all competing priorities. Some level of juggling is inevitable in any full life. The goal is to become more intentional about which balls you keep in the air, which ones you let drop temporarily, and which ones you hand off to someone else. When you master this skill, you move from feeling constantly overwhelmed to feeling purposefully engaged with what matters most. Chapter 13. When to persevere and when to pivot. One of the most challenging decisions you'll face in difficult situations is whether to keep pushing forward with your current approach or to change course entirely. This isn't just about persistence versus giving up. It's about strategic thinking, resource allocation, and honest assessment of changing circumstances. Getting this decision wrong can cost you years of effort, significant resources, and valuable opportunities. The cultural narrative around persistence is deeply misleading. We're told that successful people never give up, that winners persist through any obstacle, and that changing course is a sign of weakness or lack of commitment. But this narrative ignores the equally important truth that successful people also know when to cut their losses, pivot to better opportunities, and adapt their strategies based on new information. The key is developing criteria for making these decisions that go beyond just emotional reactions or social pressure. You need a framework that helps you distinguish between temporary setbacks that require persistence and fundamental problems that require a change in approach. Let's start with understanding what persistence should actually be based on. Effective persistence isn't just continuing to do the same thing harder or longer. It's maintaining commitment to your underlying goals while remaining flexible about the methods you use to achieve them. This distinction is crucial because it allows you to persevere with purpose rather than just stubbornly refusing to acknowledge reality. Before you can decide whether to persist or pivot, you need clarity about what you're actually trying to achieve. Are you committed to a specific outcome, a particular approach, or something deeper like a set of values or a vision for your life? Often, what feels like giving up on one level is actually recommitting at a deeper level. For example, if you're struggling in a business venture, the question isn't just whether to continue or quit. It's whether this particular business is the best way to achieve your underlying goals of financial independence, creative expression, or making a positive impact. Sometimes the most strategic move is to close one business in order to start a better one. Here's a framework for making these decisions systematically. First, assess whether you're dealing with a solvable problem or a fundamental mismatch. Solvable problems are obstacles that can be overcome with different strategies, more resources, better skills, or more time. Fundamental mismatches are situations where your goals, values, or circumstances are incompatible with the path you're on. Solvable problems often have these characteristics. You can identify specific actions that would improve the situation. Other people have successfully overcome similar challenges. You have access to the resources or support needed to address the obstacles. The timeline for improvement is reasonable given your other priorities and constraints. Fundamental mismatches often look like this. The path you're on requires you to compromise core values or priorities. Your personality, skills, or circumstances are poorly suited to what success requires. The costs of continuing significantly outweigh the potential benefits. External conditions have changed in ways that make your original plan obsolete. Another important factor is opportunity cost. What else you could be doing with the time, energy, and resources you're currently investing. This isn't just about money. It's about all the other paths you're not exploring while you're committed to your current one. Sometimes, the problem isn't that your current path is bad, but that other available paths are significantly better. Consider also the concept of sunk costs. Resources you've already invested that you can't recover. The natural tendency is to continue investing in something because you've already put so much into it, but this logic is backwards. Past investments are gone, regardless of what you do next. The only question that matters is whether future investments are likely to generate good returns. Professional investors understand this principle well. They regularly evaluate their portfolio and sell investments that no longer meet their criteria, even if those investments are currently worth less than what they originally paid. They know that holding on to losers prevents them from investing in better opportunities. Apply this same thinking to other areas of your life. The time you've already spent in a career that's not working out is gone, whether you stay or leave. The energy you've invested in a struggling relationship can't be recovered. The only relevant question is whether continuing to invest in these areas is the best use of your future resources. That said, there's also wisdom in understanding the natural cycles of difficulty that are part of any worthwhile pursuit. Most valuable goals require pushing through periods where progress feels slow or non-existent. Learning to distinguish between these temporary plateaus and genuine dead ends is crucial for long-term success. Temporary difficulties often have these characteristics. They're part of a predictable learning curve. Progress may be slow, but it's still happening. You can see examples of others who have pushed through similar challenges successfully. The fundamentals of your situation remain sound, even if current results are disappointing. Signs that you might need to pivot include no meaningful progress despite sustained effort and different approaches. The requirements for success have changed in ways that make your original plan obsolete. You've discovered new information about yourself or your situation that changes the viability of your goals. The costs of continuing are preventing you from taking care of other important areas of your life. When you're trying to make these decisions, seek out perspectives from people who don't have a vested interest in your choices. Friends and family often have their own agendas or emotional attachments to your decisions. Professional counselors, mentors, or coaches can provide more objective input based on their experience with similar situations. Also, be honest about your motivations for wanting to persist or pivot. Are you continuing because you genuinely believe it's the best path forward, or because you're afraid of how changing course will look to others? Are you considering a pivot because you've hit real obstacles, or because you're avoiding the discomfort that comes with any challenging pursuit? Sometimes the right answer is to modify your approach rather than abandoning your goals entirely. Maybe you need to change your timeline, adjust your methods, seek additional support, or redefine what success looks like. Pivoting doesn't always mean starting over. It can mean finding a better way to get where you want to go. The goal is to become comfortable with both persistence and adaptation as strategic tools rather than emotional reactions. Some situations require doubling down and pushing through obstacles. Others require acknowledging that your original plan isn't working and finding a better path. Wisdom lies in being able to tell the difference and having the courage to act on what you discover. Remember, changing course based on new information isn't failure. It's learning. The most successful people in any field are those who combine determination with flexibility, persistence with pragmatism. They're committed to their goals, but not attached to their methods. This mindset allows them to navigate uncertainty and changing circumstances while making steady progress toward what matters most. Chapter 14. Building your decision. Making confidence. Many people struggle with difficult situations not because they lack good options, but because they don't trust themselves to make good decisions. This lack of confidence creates a paralyzing cycle. You delay decisions because you're afraid of making the wrong choice, which often makes the situation worse, which then reinforces your belief that you're bad at making decisions. Breaking this cycle requires understanding that decision-making confidence isn't about always making perfect choices. It's about trusting your ability to handle the consequences of your choices and to course-correct when new information becomes available. This is a learnable skill, not a fixed personality trait. Let's start by examining what undermines decision-making confidence in the first place. Often, it comes from unrealistic expectations about what good decision-making looks like. If you believe that good decisions always lead to good outcomes, you'll lose confidence every time something doesn't go according to plan. But this belief is fundamentally flawed. The quality of a decision should be judged by the process you used to make it, not just by the outcome it produced. You can make an excellent decision based on the best available information and still have things turn out poorly due to factors you couldn't predict or control. Conversely, you can make a terrible decision and get lucky with a good outcome. But that doesn't mean you made a good decision. Professional poker players understand this distinction better than almost anyone. They know that they can play a hand perfectly and still lose due to the cards that come up. They evaluate their play based on whether they made mathematically sound decisions given the information available at the time, not just on whether they won or lost that particular hand. This mindset is liberating because it allows you to take credit for good decision-making processes even when outcomes are disappointing, and it prevents you from becoming overconfident when you get lucky despite poor processes. It also helps you focus on the aspects of decision-making that you can actually control and improve. Here's how to build decision-making confidence systematically. Start by documenting your decision-making process for important choices. Write down the problem you're trying to solve, the options you considered, the criteria you used to evaluate them, and the reasoning behind your final choice. This creates a record that you can learn from regardless of how things turn out. When you document your process, you often discover that your thinking is clearer and more thorough than you realized. This recognition builds confidence in your analytical abilities. You also create valuable material for future reflection and learning, which helps you improve your decision-making over time. Practice making decisions within appropriate time frames rather than taking unlimited time to analyze every option. Most decisions don't require perfect information, and the cost of delayed action often exceeds the cost of imperfect choices. Set deadlines for yourself and stick to them. This forces you to work with available information and prevents analysis paralysis. For reversible decisions, practice making them quickly and adjusting based on results. For irreversible decisions, take more time, but still set reasonable limits. Remember that you can often make decisions reversible by starting with small experiments or pilot programs before committing fully. Build confidence by starting with lower-stakes decisions and working your way up to higher-stakes ones. Practice your decision-making frameworks on choices about what to eat, which route to take to work, or how to spend your weekend. When you see that you can make these decisions efficiently and live with the results, you build confidence for handling bigger choices. Learn to distinguish between decision-making skills and domain expertise. You might be excellent at making decisions but lack specific knowledge about investing, relationships, or career changes. In these cases, the solution isn't to avoid making decisions. It's to seek appropriate information and advice, while still taking responsibility for the final choice. Recognize that indecision is itself a decision, and often not a good one. When you fail to make a choice, you're implicitly choosing to let circumstances, other people, or default options determine your outcome. This is rarely the best available option, but it's often what happens when people are paralyzed by fear of making the wrong choice. Reframe mistakes as tuition for your education rather than evidence of your incompetence. Every poor decision teaches you something valuable about your decision-making process, your priorities, or your circumstances. The people with the best judgment are usually those who have made the most mistakes and learned from them, not those who have avoided making difficult decisions. Develop comfort with uncertainty and ambiguity. Most important decisions involve incomplete information and uncertain outcomes. Waiting for certainty often means waiting forever, or until someone else makes the decision for you. Learning to act intelligently, despite uncertainty, is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. Practice separating your identity from your decisions. You are not defined by any single choice you make, and a poor decision doesn't make you a poor decision maker any more than a good decision makes you infallible. This perspective helps you take appropriate risks without feeling like your entire self-worth is on the line. Build a support system that helps you make decisions rather than making decisions for you. Seek out people who ask good questions, help you think through options, and support you regardless of how your choices turn out. Avoid people who pressure you towards specific choices or who judge you harshly when things don't go as planned. Celebrate good decision-making processes even when outcomes are disappointing. If you gathered appropriate information, considered relevant options, made choices aligned with your values, and acted within reasonable time frames, you made good decisions, regardless of external results. Acknowledging this builds confidence for future choices. Learn from your decision-making patterns rather than just individual decisions. Do you tend to overthink certain types of choices? Do you consistently ignore particular types of information? Do you make better decisions when you're relaxed versus stressed? Understanding your patterns helps you optimize your decision-making environment and process. Finally, remember that decision-making confidence comes from experience, not from theory. You build it by making decisions, observing results, adjusting your approach, and making more decisions. Like any skill, it improves with practice. The goal isn't to eliminate uncertainty or guarantee perfect outcomes. It's to become someone who can navigate uncertainty skillfully and learn from whatever results. Trust in your decision-making ability is ultimately trust in your ability to handle life's challenges and adapt to changing circumstances. When you develop this trust, difficult situations become opportunities to exercise your judgment rather than threats to your well-being. This shift in perspective changes everything about how you approach challenges and how you feel about your capacity to handle whatever life brings your way. Chapter 15. Creating your personal crisis management system. Everything we've covered in this video comes together in this final chapter. Creating a personalized system for handling difficult situations before they arise. Most people wait until they're in crisis to think about how to handle crisis. But that's like waiting until your house is on fire to think about fire safety. The time to build your crisis management system is when things are going well and you can think clearly. Your personal crisis management system is like an emergency toolkit for your mind. It's a collection of strategies, resources, and prepared responses that you can deploy when life gets overwhelming. Having this system in place doesn't prevent difficult situations from occurring, but it dramatically improves your ability to navigate them effectively. The foundation of any good crisis management system is self-awareness. You need to understand your typical patterns under stress. How do you usually react when things go wrong? What are your early warning signs that you're becoming overwhelmed? What triggers tend to throw you off balance? Which coping strategies work well for you, and which ones don't? Start by reflecting on how you've handled difficult situations in the past. What did you do well? What would you do differently? When did you feel most capable and confident? And what factors contributed to that? When did you feel most overwhelmed or out of control? And what could have helped in those moments? Create what I call a stress signature, a personal profile of how stress shows up in your body. Emotions, thoughts, and behavior. Maybe stress manifests as shoulder tension, irritability, racing thoughts, and a tendency to avoid difficult conversations. Or perhaps it shows up as fatigue, anxiety, mental fog, and a tendency to overcommit to low-priority tasks. Knowing your stress signature allows you to recognize difficult situations early before they escalate to crisis levels. Early recognition is crucial because it's much easier to course-correct when problems are small than when they've grown into major emergencies. Next, assemble your toolkit of coping strategies. These should include immediate stress management techniques, decision-making frameworks, communication strategies, and problem-solving approaches. Don't just collect techniques. Practice them regularly, so they become automatic when you need them most. Your immediate stress management toolkit might include breathing exercises, physical movement, mindfulness techniques, or ways to create temporary distance from overwhelming situations. The key is having multiple options available, because what works in one situation might not work in another. Your decision-making toolkit should include the frameworks we've discussed, the STOP technique, the 5-step decision process, criteria for when to persist versus pivot, and methods for distinguishing between urgent and important priorities. Write these down in a format you can reference quickly when you're stressed and not thinking clearly. Your communication toolkit should include scripts or templates for difficult conversations, strategies for asking for help effectively, and ways to express your needs and boundaries clearly under pressure. Having language prepared in advance prevents you from saying things you'll regret or failing to communicate important information. Build your support network before you need it. Identify different people who can provide different types of support. Emotional support for processing feelings, practical support for handling tasks, informational support for gaining perspective, and professional support for specialized problems. Maintain these relationships during good times so they're available during difficult times. Don't rely on just one or two people for all your support needs. This puts too much pressure on those relationships and leaves you vulnerable if those people aren't available when you need them. Instead, cultivate a diverse network of supporters who can help in different ways and different circumstances. Create what crisis management professionals call pre-mortems for the types of difficult situations you're most likely to face. A pre-mortem involves imagining that a potential crisis has already occurred and thinking through how you would respond. This isn't about being pessimistic. It's about being prepared. Consider the major areas of your life: career, finances, health, relationships, family, and identify the types of challenges that could realistically arise in each area. For each potential challenge, think through: what early warning signs would indicate this problem is developing? What resources would you need to address it effectively? Who would you turn to for support? What decisions would you need to make, and in what time frame? Having these scenarios thought through in advance doesn't guarantee that things will go exactly as planned, but it does ensure that you're not starting from zero when challenges arise. You'll have a starting point for your response, rather than having to figure everything out while you're stressed. Document your system in writing. Create a personal crisis management manual that includes your stress signature, your toolkit of strategies, your support network contacts, and your pre-planned responses to likely scenarios. Review and update this document regularly as your life circumstances change. This might seem like overkill, but remember that stress impairs memory and decision-making. Things that seem obvious when you're calm can be impossible to remember when you're overwhelmed. Having important information written down ensures you can access it when you need it most. Practice using your system regularly, not just during major crises. Use your stress management techniques when you're stuck in traffic. Practice your communication strategies during minor conflicts. Apply your decision-making frameworks to everyday choices. This regular practice makes your tools more accessible when stakes are higher. Also, practice what psychologists call stress inoculation, deliberately exposing yourself to manageable challenges to build your confidence and competence. Take on projects that stretch your abilities. Have conversations you've been avoiding, or put yourself in situations where you might fail or be rejected. This builds resilience for larger challenges. Remember that your crisis management system should evolve as you do. What works in your 20s might not work in your 40s. What works when you're single might not work when you have a family. Regularly evaluate and update your system to ensure it remains relevant to your current life circumstances. Finally, recognize that having a crisis management system is itself a source of confidence and calm. When you know you have tools and strategies available, difficult situations feel less threatening. You shift from "I don't know how I'll handle this" to "I know how to figure this out." This mindset change alone can dramatically improve your ability to think clearly under pressure. Your personal crisis management system is an investment in your future self. You're creating resources and capabilities that will serve you throughout your life, making you more resilient, more confident, and more effective at navigating whatever challenges come your way. In a world where difficult situations are inevitable, this preparation isn't just helpful, it's essential. The goal isn't to eliminate difficult situations from your life. That's neither possible nor desirable. Challenges are often how we grow, learn, and discover our capabilities. The goal is to become someone who can handle difficult situations skillfully, learning from them and using them as opportunities to develop wisdom, resilience, and confidence. When you master the art of critical thinking in difficult situations, you transform from someone who is victimized by circumstances to someone who can navigate any challenge life presents. This is perhaps the most important skill you can develop, and now you have the framework to build it systematically. The question isn't whether you'll face difficult situations. It's whether you'll be ready for them when they arrive.